I promised you guys we would be watching the biggest flexes in Isekai by any news. Now, I am a very big fan of this genre. Those of you that are unaware, I've recently made the 50 biggest flexes in anime. So I'm very excited to jump right into the biggest flexes in Isekai, which is absolutely, without a freaking shadow of a doubt, a ripoff of me.
Isekai is kind of like the League of Legends of anime.
That is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. Take it back immediately, Annie News. God!
It feels a bit wrong to keep consuming it day after day, yet we keep going back in hopes of finding that quality entertainment we experienced 5 or 6 seasons ago. It's that one love-hate relationship we just can't get rid of.
Who is this we? I feel like he's putting words into all of our mouths.
I don't know what it is exactly that makes me such a sucker for it.
I freaking love Isekai anime. They don't need to be good, but they need to be decent.
But if I had to narrow it down to one single thing, then I would probably have to say the satisfaction that stems from a proper flex. I mean, probably have to say the satisfaction that stems from a proper flex.
To purposely show off in a non-humble way. Alright, I respect it. I respect the definition. As the flexinator himself, I am the one that defines flexing. I literally came up with the word. I started this entire movement.
It's just so much fun when an OP protagonist reveals just how powerful they are.
Yeah, I'm glad we have this here, because if the biggest flex in Isekai isn't Eminence in Shadow taking a piano into a dungeon, then he's doing something wrong. That is the biggest flex in Isekai.
And it's those unrivaled moments of pure entertainment that I really want to share with you in this video here. But rather than just showcase the scenes and talk about how epic they were, in order to ensure the full extent of the flex is understood, I'll also share how it was portrayed in the novels. You know, just for that extra bit of context.
All right.
It would be a shame to not experience these iconic moments the way the person who created them intended them to be.
Oh dude, Ainzul Gown just emanates the flex energy.
So, as I follow in the footsteps of our Lord and Savior Nux, here's
whoa, what the frick? The homage, the respect! The unexpected random Nux jump scare. Oh god, Jabus, I just got Nux jump scared. Holy crap. Nothing but respect, Annie News. Biggest of the shout outs to you.
On the biggest
Lord and
flexes
Savior
in Isekai.
Nux here. Yeah.
Let's start things off with a slightly more obscure moment. A flex not from a single character or OP protagonist, but instead a display of power from an entire army. That's right.
No.
I'm talking about a—
No, this was not a flex! I hated Gate. This is not it, bro.
Scene from one of my personal favorites, Gate.
Oh.
For those who've come to my streams, you'll know this to be up here not because the plot is anything too special.
Yeah, it's not.
But instead because the whole aspect of modern meets medieval is just so damn entertaining.
That's fair. It's... Dude, the flex is that there are tanks. The flex is, well, you know, in this ancient world of fairies and dragons and demons, we have fucking missiles! Right? Giant dragon, and they're like taking all their people, and they're like, ah yes, but missiles.
Like, imagine if the modern armies of today were to face off against the imperial armies of ancient Rome. They may have been the most powerful state in the world at the time, but no amount of numbers would offset the difference in technological advancement.
Yeah.
So, in a world where no army could even compete with the might of Rome's, what do you think would happen if a mysterious foe significantly smaller suddenly showed up right in their territory? That's pretty much what we're dealing with here. A gate had opened up right in the heart of Japan, and through that gate emerged monsters and the forces of the imperial capital controlling them. Once those forces were eliminated and pushed back, it was only natural Japan respond with an army of their own. A small battalion—
This is not a flex as much as it is Japan wanking off the fact that they have an army.
Comprised of our main character and the JSDF task force accompanying him, whose job was to go beyond the gate and to perform recon into the special region these attackers appeared from. So, with infantry, tanks, and APCs, the JSDF would make light work out of the Imperial Army currently holding the gate, then proceed to take control of the entire area surrounding it, wiping out 60% of the Empire's forces in only a matter of days. That may sound like a flex all on its own, but the true flex actually comes from the Empire's response to it, or more so Japan's response to that response. With 60% of their army now gone, the Empire decided it would attack with its vassal states now. a joint alliance consisting of over 21 nations who, when gathered together, would create a force numbering in the hundreds of thousands.
I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, there are lots of people, and then the Japanese guys come in with their guns, and then they just shoot them and they die. And then they get more people, and then the Japanese come with bigger guns and they die. And you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, this anime sounds boring as fuck. It is. This anime is boring as fuck. It is not a good anime. Please.
What this coalition thought to be a battle for their very continent, though, was in fact nothing more than a glorified slaughter. A one-sided carnage that could only be described as a mass suicide. You see, because the Empire never gave any intel on the enemy the coalition would be facing, the Alliance just assumed they would automatically win because of their far superior numbers. When they had initiated that first assault, though, the vanguard, which consisted of over 10,000 men, was instantly wiped out by a barrage of artillery. Explosive shells rained down and obliterated any person within a certain distance to their base. This wasn't just for the sake of defending their ground, though, but was in fact a show of power intended to utterly destroy the enemy. It was a flex in the truest sense of the word.
This wasn't really
an impressive display
flex,
with the sole purpose of
listen.
showing the Empire exactly what they were dealing with.
Guess, sort of.
A message made loud and clear through the eviscerated bodies of the dead.
You want to know a flex? The poop bombs that Nobunaga made in Drifters. That was a flex.
Any
in
enemy
Isekai.
to enter into this designated kill zone would instantly and ruthlessly meet the same fate as all those other soldiers. Now, just because the vanguard was obliterated, didn't mean the coalition was done there. 2 more offensives would be attempted before reaching absolute annihilation. The second was another upfront charge with 4 times the troops, but no matter how many they tried to attack with, their lack of range made getting close incredibly futile. Even their dragon riders were shredded by whatever anti-air the JSDF were equipped with. When we finally get to that third ambush at night, despite the idea being practical for the time, the use of flares made whatever movements they were making clear as day. Their assumption the enemy would be careless or off guard was a mistake that would end up being their last. So, as the remaining troops snuck their way towards the enemy, the only thing they would be greeted with was a coordinated volley of bullets. It was a relentless barrage of fire the Empire could only perceive as magic. So, I know this isn't your typical flex of a single person doing OP things, but this and a lot of the other scenes in Gate remain some of my favorite in any isekai. It just takes the whole, oh you underestimate our power to a scale we've never actually seen before. And it's the way it portrays that with the true application of modern day knowledge that just makes it so entertaining and
Just shoot right through the shields.
fascinating.
They just take a gun out and shoot right through their great shields. Oh, God. Dog, I agree that these scenes were cool, but to spend 5 minutes talking about that, dog, no. The biggest flex is in Isekai. Tanya the Evil, bro. There are so many Isekais with bigger flexes.
To switch to something a bit more classic, this next flex is what I believe to be the gold standard of the very act of flexing.
It is. This is one of the biggest flexes in anime, I'd say.
I'm sure you're all familiar with them.
Carry this, filthy casual. Seethe and cope.
It deals with a character whose sole purpose is to flex in the most overpowering way possible. That's right. I'm talking about Sid's 2-on-1 against Beatrix and Iris in episode 20 of
just
Eminence.
Disgusting. He stands on them.
Shadow. Not only was he facing 2 of the kingdom's most skilled and renowned swordswomen, but the entire thing was essentially child's play for him. It was a fight that truly set the scope of just how powerful he is. Before we get to the scene where this flex occurs though, I'm sure there are some of you who haven't yet had the pleasure of watching this gem yet. So, to sum things up in a couple of sentences, Sid is a high school student who, when reincarnated, can finally achieve his wish of becoming the Eminence in Shadow.
Yeah.
What is this Eminence in Shadow, you
Well, no one knows, but it sounds cool as fuck.
may ask? Well, that would be a person who appears like a minor character in public, but in actuality is this grand mastermind pulling all the strings in secret. He orchestrates all these amazing schemes, then only reveals himself at the point that he determines coolest. After which he always proceeds to annihilate whoever it is in the most badass way possible. So, with Sid having just gone through this massive battle tournament solely for the purpose of checking off a trope on his bucket list, he creates the identity of Mundane Man, then proceeds to advance the rounds all the way to the semis where a single strike was all it took to defeat the kingdom's strongest swordswoman. Which, if not for the scenes to come after, would have definitely been the flex of choice since that too was incredibly epic.
Oh, you know what was even more incredibly epic? When she was about to fight him, and then she sensed the fact that he, cut her head off, but he didn't. It was a moment that he could have killed her, and she felt that. That moment was crazy. That's wild, bro. That's one of the biggest flexes in anime.
Pretty much every fight Mundane Man took part in was an inconceivable show of force intended to highlight just how overpowering he was. But despite how oppressive such well-planned flexes were, he wasn't done there, as a certain situation required the attention of his true identity. So, after exposing himself as the wanted criminal Shadow, Sid would be faced once again by that same swordswoman he just defeated, as well as the world-renowned goddess of war, Beatrix. She's not actually a goddess, but as a warrior deemed one of the strongest swordswomen in the world, she's definitely no pushover either. Well, at least not when fighting against anyone other than Shadow anyway.
Yeah!
Now, while the anime extended this fight 10 minutes longer than it should have been,
it's like everyone else is living in a completely conceivable world. Like, everything that happens in this world, you know, it makes sense on its own level. Like, these people are strong compared to everyone else in the world. He is just an entirely new level that none of them could have ever even anticipated.
The real flex comes from the climactic moment at the end of it. You see, as soon as both swordswomen realized neither could win on their own, they decided to put it all on the line and try one last tactic together against him. Iris would sacrifice her own body to immobilize Shadow, while Beatrix would jump in and deliver the finishing blow on him. What neither had come to realize, though, was that Shadow's specialty in close quarters combat had made seeing through their plan extremely simple. Their unpolished movements and lack of finesse placed them miles behind the refined perfection of Sid's movements.
You fools!
So, as he countered with the exact same attack they tried to use against
him,
both would be defeated in a humiliating manner unlike anything either have ever experienced.
Oh, with the butt in the air. That's the worst of it.
Where Sid takes this flex to the next level is the absolute disregard he showed for either of them after. In fact, I would even go so far as to call the whole thing just plain disrespectful. You see, while both swordswomen still wanted to continue fighting, Sid was done playing with what was essentially toys to him. The only reason he had even turned around to confront them once more was simply because one of them had asked if he was running away. And that was a question that misunderstood everything Sid's eminence and Shadow title stood for. They were words that clearly didn't understand yet the force of nature she'd been fighting with.
Yeah, he was not only, like, they were trying to taunt him saying you're trying to run away, which obviously he wasn't. He was disappointed that they would even have, conceived that he had any reason to run.
So, as Sid could only laugh at such a ridiculous prospect, he would then hit her with the coldest set of lines I've ever heard in an anime, following it up with a torrent of magic so large that the two in front of him couldn't even fathom just how outmatched they were in terms of power. Like, the man had literally made it seem as if he was about to nuke the capital, all because someone asked him if he was running away. If that isn't one of the biggest flexes in Isekai, then I'd love to know which moments you consider to be better.
No,
For me, this will always be one of the best just because of how high quality the anime made it. It's one of the rare cases where the anime actually expands on the events of the novels.
No, this was one of the biggest flexes.
Switching back to an isekai a little less talked about, the scene we have next comes from Yojo Senki, the Battle of Rhine from episode 1, in which Tanya is tasked with—
We all knew that Yojo Senki was gonna be here. Freaking Tanya the Evil.
Saving a company of artillery scouts. Before we get to the flex from that though, if you're unfamiliar with this World War I inspired isekai, it's essentially a salaryman who reincarnates as an orphaned girl into an alternate version of Imperial Germany. The war takes place within the 1920s, and magic has been deeply incorporated into core aspects of the military, making those who are gifted with it quite valuable assets on the battlefield. So, when Tanya is found to possess a high aptitude for this magic, she decides to accept her inevitable conscription and volunteers to enlist in hopes she can rise the ranks fast enough to become an elite who can completely avoid battle, bringing us to one of her missions as a lieutenant. With an allied company being pinned by enemy mages, Tanya and her single platoon would be tasked with rescuing
you should watch Tanya.
Leading us to this epic—
I'm out of ammo, but I don't need ammo!
Fight between one group of 4 and an entire mage company numbering 15. Normally a matchup like this would be impossible, but with Tanya alone capable of taking on 3 platoons solo, the entire fight amounted to nothing more than target practice.
Dude, I love how he's describing all these flexes in Tanya the Evil, but he's forgetting the biggest flex in Tanya the Evil. He's forgetting the fact that Tanya the Evil was this ruthless Japanese salaryman dude who gets killed, gets pushed in front of a train. God saves him. God puts him in an alternate world. God gives him superpowers. And then he says, I don't believe God is real. That is one of the biggest flexes in anime. And that is the biggest flex in Tanya the Evil.
Her elite skills combined with that incredible aptitude for magic placed her well on her way to becoming an ace of aces. In fact, she was already known on the battlefield as a registered mage, a named adversary which was a privilege belonging solely to those who dominated the battlefield. So, the moment the Republic realized they were up against the Devil of Rhine, they immediately understood that they'd come across a calamity. Like, even without considering her lethal maneuvers in aerial combat, her heavy mana spatial detonation and precision optical sniping formulas were abilities capable of devastating entire units before the battle had even started. That being the case, the named company she was facing would attempt to fight by engaging at a closer range, but Tanya would remain 4,000 feet above the limits of what they could even ascend to. She was operating at an altitude no normal mage could withstand no matter how amazing they were. But despite the idea that it was impossible, here Tanya was preparing the single attack that would end the battle in an instant, all while the Republic could do nothing but watch her do so. So, as she prepared herself for a spatial detonation of mana, she would also tell headquarters to send out a theater alert, which for those who are unaware of what that means is essentially a warning to all friendlies in the battlefield to prepare for how disruptive her explosion would be.
She's about to commit an act of unmitigated fatherlessness.
Not just any soldier was capable of. So, not only would her attack cut off communications and disable flight for all mages in a certain radius, but those caught within it were certain to die either from lack of oxygen or carbon monoxide poisoning.
Which is pretty bad.
And even if they did somehow manage—
I could be wrong that these explanations are far too long. Yeah, I feel like the video would be better if it was snappier. If it stuck to like not more than 3 minutes per flex. Because once you over-explain the level of flexering, like you kind of lose some of the flexing.
Both of those. Anyone caught in the blast were sure to have collapsed lungs and eventually fall to their deaths from unsustainable flight formula.
But then again, he likes Gate, so I mean, you know, yeah, but he makes great content.
It was a truly devastating attack that highlighted her superiority as a mage combatant. A flex that sets the stage for Tanya since she's shown to easily handle an entire company solo right from episode 1. One that I should remind you also shared that same privilege of being named. Okay, so we've covered a modern army versus a medieval one, a single Chunibyu versus the 2 strongest swordswomen in the world, then a little girl versus an entire company of battle-hardened mage soldiers.
Alright.
What that brings us to now then is a
Oh no, not Rimuru!
single slime versus an army of 10,000.
Oh, that's rough,
I wouldn't really call this a fight though, since the entire thing was over before anyone even realized what was happening. So, as much as I'm sure this series needs no introduction, the scene I'm talking about is Rimuru's Demon Lord Awakening, a flex from episode 34 of That Time I Reincarnated as a Slime. If you're one of the few that haven't seen this series yet, well, it's essentially a salaryman who reincarnates as an OP slime who then proceeds to establish their own nation of monsters. The reason Rimuru felt the need to flex on another nation's army was because that same army had just invaded Tempest. They had fabricated a false reason for which to start a conflict, then proceeded to attack the city while Rimuru was absent. So, with the city destroyed and numerous of his people dead, the only path to save them was by becoming a demon lord. Only by ascending to a
Which is kind of hilarious. Like, he's like, yes, I'll become a demon lord, I guess.
Whole new plane of power would it even be possible to resurrect the people he'd lost. The thing about such an evolution, though, was that the requirements for doing so were rather costly. At least 10,000 human souls were needed as sacrifice for it. That being the case, it was rather lucky then that an army he just so happened to despise was currently stationed right next to him. The invading force of 20,000 in which no single person was allowed to be spared. If they were willing to declare war on an unsuspecting nation, then it was only fair that they be ready to die for that war.
I love how he says it so calmly. This was a genocide.
Since this wasn't even a war though, the least they could do in reparation for their sins was enjoy the honor of helping Rimuru evolve into a demon lord. So, as Rimuru hovered over the unsuspecting army who'd just attacked him, he had prepared a new spell specifically for them. A brand new type of magic that went by the name of Megiddo. By using spirit magic to manipulate water elementals into the form of his choosing, he would create these lenses that gather the sun's light, then have that light concentrated into a single powerful laser beam. resulting in this endless barrage of solar-powered death rays that no one could even see or hear coming.
Like, it would just kill all of the pew 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 pew. Not only are these people dying, but they are getting killed by history's smallest bullet.
1,000 miles away, and this devastating attack would still
I'm gonna go see what happens.
find its target in less than 1/20th of a second. So, with over 12 lenses deployed at the ready, Rimuru's first blast would slaughter 1,000. 5 minutes later, and that count had grown to over 10,000. He had descended on this army like the god of death and began a massacre no one anticipated or could even react to. What makes this flex fundamentally different from all the others, though, is that, unlike how the rest weren't entirely personal, Rimuru's was done with the intent to create despair and instill terror. He had intentionally avoided lethal blows on various soldiers, just so he could use their screams to add to the chaos. Whether it
Holy crap, I didn't know that. What? Oh my god!
was dismembering limbs or maiming others, Rimuru wanted everyone to tremble in the wake of his destruction. He was so effective at doing so that much of the remaining army had just given up on trying to survive. They had accepted that this was where they'd die, and in return Rimuru was given a new skill called Merciless, an ability that allowed him to reap the souls of any person who begged for mercy or just no longer had the will to fight.
Dude literally scared the hell out of them so much that they give up the will to fight, and then he just simply steals their souls.
So, not only did Rimuru create a new form of magic just to wipe out 20,000 troops as efficiently as possible, but he had also flexed on them so incredibly hard that the only thing they could do was accept their fate and wait their turn to die. It was so devastating that even the world itself couldn't ignore it, resulting in the birth of a new skill that would help to kill them even faster. So, I don't know about you, but if the world
This is the ultimate farming technique. My man out here, he figured out the best rune farm in Elden Ring.
itself acknowledges how OP your flex is, then I think that's grounds enough for it to be one of the biggest.
I would agree.
But yeah, those are some of the biggest flexes in Isekai.
Can't believe
I
my
know
man didn't go next flex even once.
There's several more out there that are probably even bigger, but really this was just an excuse to talk about some of my favorite anime. Shows that I don't usually get the chance to talk about otherwise. So, if you enjoyed this type of content and want to
Gamers, check out Annie News. He's a wonderful man. He even appreciates, culture.
the way the person who created them intended them to be. So, as I follow in the footsteps of our Lord and Savior Nux,
Ladies and gentlemen, this man deserves your love and respect. Thank you so much for joining this occasion. The biggest flexes in Isekai, except for not talking about Overlord. I respect it tremendously. Hells to the yeah. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed. This was a wholesome time. Like, subscribe, and follow me on Twitch. Stay weird, fam.